All right, we will start with this consideration of diffusion in porous solids afresh. I probably told you some time back that this could be actually a misnomer, although as engineers we will continue to call it diffusion in porous solids. In principle, what we are discussing is quite a different phenomenon. Diffusion, as we know, might occur in parts, but then there are some fundamental differences. Historically, it was in 1957 that a group of researchers, Hammersley and Broadbent. Hammersley was a British mathematician and Broadbent was a mining engineer. They were somehow looking at design of a mask based on adsorbents to protect miners from poisonous gases. So, you could imagine that if this is a piece of equipment they were designing, they would have some highly porous adsorbent in contact with the ambient air containing poisonous gases, as would occur in a mining environment. So, while looking at this problem, they realized that while diffusion could be some underlying mechanism, there are what they called memory effects, which meant that the overall behavior of the solute molecules in this porous medium would be influenced by what was the condition some time back. I would want you to visualize a porous network. Imagine that there is a porous network. Within a solid, you have these pores of varying geometries, and imagine that there is a particular solute whose diffusion or behavior within this porous solid is of interest to us. It could be that after having entered the interior of this porous solid, the solute molecules might reach the interior surface of solid and possibly undergo even a chemical reaction, if not only adsorption. Now, if you were to look at the macroscopic behavior of this porous solid as an adsorbent or a catalyst, it would depend on these microscopic events of how many solute molecules are inside and where they are. It would also depend on the way these adsorption or surface reaction sites are distributed throughout the interior surface. I had given you an idea that in a gram of a activated carbon, there is so much of internal area that the size of a typical football ground could be accommodated within a pellet of 1 gram. So much area gets packed inside. So, with this large area, there would be corresponding large number of catalytic sites, and a solute molecule, if it reaches the catalyst site, it could undergo this surface reaction. Now, if we were to visualize this catalyst pellet and its macroscopic performance, that is, what is the rate of reaction or conversion in this catalyst, it would depend on how many solute molecules are there inside, where they are in context of the distribution of these catalytic sites. That in turn would depend on how the solute molecules got there. You might have a large number of solute molecules in a region where there are few catalytic sites, then obviously the reaction rate will drop down. On the other hand, if it happened that large number of solute molecules are in a region which are rich in these surface concentration of catalytic sites, reaction rate would be high. So, you could see these macroscopic differences in the rates of reaction rates or rates of conversion depending on how the molecules are present inside. That in turn would depend on which molecules happen to be at the particular set of pore mouths. Let us say 1000 molecules are crowded around a few pores, which would eventually lead to this high surface concentration of catalytic sites. If that happens to be the case, then you would observe a large reaction rate. If it were the other way around, you would see a different reaction rates, a different set of reaction rates. So it means now not just the interior structure or distribution of catalytic sites, but also where the solute molecules happen to be some time back when they are at a point of entry into a pore mouth. So this is a kind of memory effect Hammersley and Broadbent were looking at, and that's where they came up with the concept of what would be appropriate word replacing this diffusion in porous solids, rigorously speaking, and that's percolation theory. Okay. I won't have too much time to deal with percolation theory here, but I will give you some interesting pieces of information. A brief introduction is in order, although we are going to stick to the engineer's version of diffusion in porous solids for most part. Let me explain the concept of percolation theory. Some of you might be aware. Yeah. See, you imagine this catalyst pellet in a gas mixture. Now, the gas mixture may be mixed, okay, but it may not be completely mixed. So what would happen is there could be transient pockets of high concentration, transient pockets of low concentration. So imagine that some t minus time before 0, a particular pore mouth which would open into a rich set of catalytic sites concentration, if that were exposed to a pocket or eddy of high concentration, lots of solute molecules will enter. At this point of time where we are looking, the conversion rate or rate of reaction will be very high. But if it were instead an eddy which had hardly any solute molecules, then there will be only a few molecules which will enter, and the reaction rate you would observe now will be much lower. Okay. So what the system configuration were some t minus time before 0 has influence now. That is the kind of memory effect the system is exhibiting. Depends, right? So it depends. So that in this example would depend on how efficient your mixing is. Suppose the condition of well stirred idealization is true, then of course you would not be able to see tangible difference. But if the mixing is not efficient, you would have this non-uniformity. This is only to drive home a point. There may be whole range of such factors which will come up sometime later. This would not be a problem in the usual diffusional systems. Now let me come to the percolation theory. For this I have to introduce you to something even more fundamental, and that is critical phenomena. The critical phenomena are characterized by observation of certain property which would show an abrupt increase. Let us say you had a network, a physical network where you could make the crossings of wires as nodes, and between two nodes we have bonds. So we will need some basic terminology. So if you have a wire mesh, the points where 4 wires intersect, that will call node, and between any two nodes there will be a length of this wire segment which we will call bond. Okay. Supposing that this network were made of an insulator, suppose we did not have wire in the beginning, but rather we had an insulator, take maybe polymeric fibers making this network, and I just want you to imagine this, and across this network you place 2 electrodes, one on the left, my left and my right, and you connect it to a outer circuit. So there is a battery or a DC supply, and you have, let us say, ammeter to measure the current. If you start with this polymeric fiber network, obviously you won't observe any current. Okay. Now imagine that you could randomly choose these nodes or the crossings, and if it is a square network, if you randomly pick up a node, then all 4 bonds connecting that node to the adjacent nodes, let us say we replace with metallic wire. If you just do it for the first few times, randomly picked up nodes and replacement of 4 corresponding bonds by metal wire, we still would not be able to observe any current. Okay. If you keep on replacing these nodes and corresponding bonds with actual conducting wires, up to certain replacement, maybe you won't see anything, no current. But there eventually would come a point where you observe current and suddenly that current rises with further replacements, all random. Okay. So, this is an example of a critical phenomenon, and you could do this kind of simulation very easily on your computer also. All you have to do is create a matrix with whatever number of lattice points or nodes you have, and then have a mechanism to randomly pick up these nodes. That could be done by generation of random numbers, say xy coordinates can be randomly generated, and then you call the non-conducting sites, let us say as zeros, and conducting sites as 1. So, you can do these random replacements and then see whether there is anything connecting left to right. The first time a connection can be traced within this network, you would observe that there should be current observable. Okay. So, this is exactly what could be done. You could go the other way around, you could take a wire network, randomly pick up nodes and cut off the 4 bonds. If you keep doing this, then after you have cut off sufficient number of randomly chosen nodes, then the current will suddenly drop. Okay. If you do this experiment large number of times, see it is going to be this way, that you do one experiment and you find that it becomes conducting at a certain fraction of conducting nodes. If you take next random sequence which is different from this, you will get another number. If you repeat it large number of times and take an average, it turns out that as you do it for large number of repetitions, the critical fraction at which this network will become conducting will approach a very specific number with increasing number of digits you can be sure of with more repetitions, and that number happens to be in this 2-dimensional network 0.59. Okay. So, individual trials might have given you 0.57, maybe 0.61, etc., but you do large number of repetitions and you see now there is a definite number coming out, 0.59, 5 and 9 are certain. You do more repetitions, you can be sure of more decimals. And this 59%, approximately 59% of the conducting nodes leading to percolation or flow of current in this case, this is called percolation threshold. Okay. You could do another experiment, very simple experiment. You could, instead of taking this 2-dimensional network, take a box, say a cardboard box, whose left hand face and right hand face are replaced by metallic conducting plates, and you have external circuit, a source of DC supply and an ammeter to measure current, and you fill this box with, let us say, plastic spheres, all of same size. To begin with, you will have no conductivity. Now start randomly picking up these plastic balls and replace them with metal spheres which are conducting. If you do this large number of times or do the simulations corresponding to this in 3D, then it turns out that you can be sure of a number which is 0.31 once again. So, it means now there is some definite concept which is emerging here. That is the basic percolation theory. Now, there are lots of developments of this, and incidentally what I had done now in this small example in context of percolation theory, I have described to you a very powerful simulation tool called Monte Carlo simulation. Monte Carlo simulation is nothing but these simulations which are based on random numbers. Maybe one or two things related to random numbers I can tell you. That there is one thing is there is no true random number generator. Everything is actually a pseudo random number generator. No matter what method you use, you will be able to increase the length of this sequence which is random, then after some time it starts repeating. So, Actually, there is nothing like for infinity, there will be complete randomness. There is nothing like that. So, what you do is basically in context of a particular simulation, you have to choose that random number generator whose sequence will be exceeding the requirement. So, suppose you require only 100 numbers which are randomly generated. You choose the sequence, random number sequence generator, which can give you 10,000 random numbers. It won't repeat before that. Then this requirement, limited requirement, is met. Okay. Now, how you do that? Now, I'll leave that. Currently, we have lots of algorithms available. Random numbers can be reliably generated, and every time you repeat it, you have a different simulation. So, when you approach nature, we might sum up. We have broadly these three ways of studying it. One, of course, is our favorite, experiments. Engineers have to rely on experiments. Nothing more sure than experiment. The second thing is, when you understand physics well enough, then you can write your equations, differential equations, and then solve them and develop faith that under controlled conditions the phenomenon under consideration will be accurately mimicked. Then you go for larger scale simulation. So, that is the mathematical modeling which is typical, which is based on equations, something which is definite, we are sure of, science we are sure of. And the third independent way of studying it is through these random numbers, okay, or Monte Carlo simulation. One last thing I am tempted to tell you about the Monte Carlo simulation. I think this discussion won't be complete until I have explained that. Think of a y versus x plot. Okay, you have y versus x plot, and let's say you have a arbitrary curve given. Just imagine whatever curve on this y versus x you have, and we are required to find out the area under the curve. Obviously, there will be a number of ways in which you could do it. Probably the most entertaining way would be that you have this as a target, that curve is there, and then you shoot arrows at this yx plot large number of times and see how many of your arrows have struck the area under the curve. That number divided by total number of arrows shot will give you the fraction of this area, more the number of arrows you shoot at this. Okay. This is nothing but because this is presuming that you are not very well trained person, skilled in shooting arrows. So, some of your shots might go outside this, those will be washed out, right? That is the term. But otherwise, you are going to hit this target almost in a random fashion. If you do that, what you have done is essentially Monte Carlo simulation. Incidentally, this is a very powerful tool when it comes to the statistical mechanical systems. I don't know whether you have ventured to look at those books, but if you pick up a statistical mechanics book, you will find frightening number of multiple integrals one comes across. Most of those integrals could be very easily integrated or evaluated using Monte Carlo simulation or random numbers on a computer. That's only one example to give you an entire picture of the Monte Carlo simulation and percolation theory. Okay. Now, we go beyond, we come to the traditional route. We first quickly sum up where we are likely to come across these porous solids. Yeah. Name more? Anything more? Catalyst pellet. What else? Porous membrane, leaching of a mineral from an ore and so on, or drying of a moist solid. All these are examples of porous solids. Okay. What typically happens if you take a membrane, the porous membrane separates two compartments containing different concentrations of a gas mixture. So, under the influence of this concentration difference, there could be a diffusional flux. If there is also a pressure difference, there could be hydrodynamic flow, and both could be happening together. Flow will, where present, will dominate always. Convection is dominant. Within the pores, we might have diffusion happening. Okay. And in general, the porous solids, including a pumice stone or a sponge or a porous membrane, in general you would come across pores which are not very easy to describe. In the sense, we might have various kinds of pores. So, what kind of diffusion could happen? One, within the pores you would have diffusion which could be ordinary diffusion as you studied so far, that master equation of diffusion where the flux is related to the flux ratio and end concentrations. That kind of equation may be adequate and ordinary diffusion coefficient might operate within a pore. But you might have a very different kind of diffusion also happening, which shows that the effective diffusion coefficient is not dependent on temperature and pressure like it does in ordinary diffusion. In ordinary diffusion, you expect the diffusivity roughly to go as T to the power 3 by 2, temperature to the power 3 by 2, and you expect this to go inversely as pressure. If it is not such diffusion I talked about earlier, which might happen at very low pressures, you might have a different kind of dependence on temperature and pressure. Okay. In addition, we might have diffusion on the top of a surface, interior, exterior, whatever. If you have a surface and then there is a difference in concentration of solute adsorbed, then along the surface there may be gradient of concentration, surface concentration, and that will lead to flux, and that is surface diffusion. So, these three kinds of diffusion you could encounter in a porous solid. Before we come to a little more discussion on this diffusion in pores, we should see what kinds of pores we expect. Okay. It would depend on how you created that porous solid. In terms of categories, you might have these interconnected, dead end or isolated. Interconnected pores are the pores which connect the solid from both the ends. Suppose you have a disc which is porous. Interconnected pore will be running from left hand face to right hand face, through and through. So, a solute molecule could enter one side and leave from the other. So, those are interconnected, running through the entire body of the solid. You could have dead end pores, which means now the solute molecules could enter one phase, but after going in the direction towards the other phase, you come to a point where there is no way to go further. That is actual dead end. There is no way to go forward. It could be other way around. The solute is entering from this space, the pore opens from the other, but it is the same thing, mirror image of this or whatever conceptually. And then there could be third category of pores which are kind of occluded or embedded within the solid. They are not accessible from any of these phases. So, those will be isolated pores. Predominantly, the interconnected and dead end pores might contribute to the observable flux, whereas the isolated pores will not participate in diffusion. I construed one imaginary case practically where the diffusion within the solid is very slow, and if there are these isolated pores within, they might provide shortcuts or paths of lesser resistance and therefore influence the flux in some way, but practically we can ignore this. Now, there is one more problem. These pores, they will not be like straight capillaries. Interconnected pores also, they will not be necessarily straight capillaries unless you have made the solid using capillaries. If you have created the porous solid using the porogens or what could vaporize upon rise of temperature, converting from a liquid or solid into a vapor or gas, you would produce these pores which are irregular. Irregular in the sense their cross section will vary. They may not be straight, so they could be tortuous. Okay. So, we can never be sure what is the cross section and what is the actual length. Okay. So, if you imagine that the pores are created irregular and they are in large number, and if we have to describe the diffusional flux through such a system, it is going to be impossible until of course you have taken a 3D image of the entire pore network and simulated it down to the ultimate detail. That is not possible in practice. So obviously, if you have to analyze system like this, you have to make some approximation. So the approximations could be to imagine that the actual irregular pores are described by regular pores. So they could be cylindrical capillaries running parallel to each other. They could be different in cross sections, but within each capillary you can write your equations and solve them, right? And then perhaps in some way you could take care of the distribution of the areas of these capillaries, straight capillaries. Those were the early kinds of models which appeared in the earliest phase of development of theory of diffusion in porous solids. Okay, we'll not have time or opportunity to do that, but we should be able to talk about something. So the actual pores are neither straight, they are not of constant diameter, and you think of an example we have talked of, catalyst pellet. Usually you make a catalyst pellet from fine powder of particles which are microporous. Okay. So by any one of the techniques of making the catalyst, you would create these small particles, microscopic particles, which have much finer porosity, and then you would take that powder and compact it in a pelletizer into a catalyst pellet. If you were to measure the pore size distribution for such a catalyst pellet, then it turns out that you find two peaks. One peak happens at a small size, maybe nanometers or tens of nanometers, hundreds of nanometers, and then maybe up to a micron, and then you have another peak at much larger sizes, which will be comparable to the dimension of these particles. So what happens if actually you take these microporous particles and compact them together, the pore network which is there within the individual particle, that will contribute to the first peak at the small microscopic pore size. And then when you compact these particles together, there will be interstitial space left between particles, among particles. Those will be contributing to the porosity at much larger size range. So that kind of disperse distribution of pore sizes is quite common in dealing with the catalyst pellets made this way. Okay. Now within the pore, and the pressure is not very low, then you would have this equation which we just referred to. The flux will be given in terms of this flux fraction and the end concentration. Only problem is whether DAB is the right thing to use. This was the equation we used for bulk gas. Now we have this same gas, but within pores. Experimentally, for a membrane or a catalyst particle, you would measure the flux not based on actual pore mouth area. You cannot do that because we may not even know what is the actual pore mouth area. So if you have a disc with cross sectional area 1 centimeter square, of this maybe 70% is open. So 0.7 centimeter square will be all the pore mouth area summed up. Actual area is 1 centimeter square, but we don't know that 0.7. This is only for imagination. Either we have to do high instrumental characterization to find out what the pore cross section is, or what we could do is you could measure the actual rates of absorption and divide by the entire area of this membrane, like 1 centimeter square. In which case you could say only with certainty that this is not the actual area, pore mouth area is smaller than this. Okay, because actual rate of mass transfer has been divided by a larger area, the flux you attribute to the diffusion through porous solid will be lesser. If this equation has to predict that flux, it will mean in effect we can't use this ordinary molecular diffusivity, but we'll have to use some smaller diffusivity which will be effective diffusivity under ordinary diffusion condition, but through porous medium. You get that? I repeat, you have total area of disc say 1 centimeter square, actual pore mouth area on that surface is say 0.7. And supposing you have 1 gram mole per centimeter square per second, or 1 gram mole per second is the rate of mass transfer. You divide by unit area, you will get 1 gram mole per centimeter square per second. Okay. This is which is based on overestimation of that area. Actually, if the area were known, we should have divided 1 gram mole per second by 0.7 centimeter square, which will be a number greater than 1, right? So we know that the actual flux would be higher, and you are calling it lower because of division by a larger area. So that factor must be accommodated in a smaller diffusivity. So here we come to the concept of effective diffusivity. Now the question is there a way to infer that effective diffusivity? Okay. So if ordinary diffusivity is to be related to this effective diffusivity, you probably will have to bring in some characteristics of this porous material. Okay. And what are the characteristic quantities of this porous network? One is of course the porosity, which may be measurable. And then second characteristic will be how long winded these pores are rather than straight. That is a tortuosity. So the effective diffusivity that we are talking of will be related to this diffusivity, the porosity and tortuosity roughly this way. For many cases, it has been observed that ordinary molecular diffusion multiplied by porosity divided by tortuosity, this gives you effective diffusivity through the porous medium. Okay. But having said this, there have been instances where people had to raise this epsilon to as high as power 3. So this is only an empirical adjusting of what accommodation you made in terms of the area which is based on the external area, since we do not know what is the actual pore mouth area. Okay. So presuming that for a given solute A diffusing through a stagnant other component B through a medium which has porosity epsilon and tortuosity tau, this is the way it is related. DAB effective is now DAB, which is ordinary molecular diffusion coefficient epsilon by tau. Okay. Now you think of this ratio DAB by DAB effective, that will be tau by epsilon. It's a constant for a given solid. I'll take example. Suppose A is oxygen, B is nitrogen, and I have a porous solid which is a given porous membrane or a silica, alumina, catalyst, whatever you have. Suppose we keep this solid, porous solid fixed, and I replace oxygen by hydrogen. By virtue of this relation, which will go as tau by epsilon, epsilon is the porosity of solid, tau is the tortuosity, which is the characteristic of that set of pores. Changing oxygen to hydrogen is not going to change this ratio. In other words, once we have characterized a porous medium for one pair of solutes, the same relationship would be valid because it is independent of solute pair now, solute and solvent pair. It is dependent on the porous solid. It's characteristic of the porous solid. That's what I have tried to explain. In general, within the pore, a good approximation could be a stagnancy for the second component. So NB could be taken as 0. If it is a catalyst, then you may have stoichiometry of the surface reaction providing a relation between N and NB. In case of liquids, we will be replacing the mole fractions by XA1 and XA2 and the concentration C by rho by M average. Rest remains same. Okay. So you should be able to solve problems of this kind. Let me see whether I can give you a couple of problems probably next time. Epsilon, this one is a relationship for relating ordinary molecular diffusion coefficient to the effective diffusion coefficient, and it will be modified by the characteristics of the porous solid, epsilon porosity, tau tortuosity. These are characteristic of the given porous solid. If you change the porous solid, solute pair remains same, this would change because epsilon will be different, tau will be different. But if you keep the same porous solid and change A and B, this won't change. So if I say DAB, effective is DAB epsilon by tau, and I replace A by C and B by D, different molecular species, it will be now dCd equal to dCd effective is equal to dCd epsilon by tau. So, this epsilon by tau is same. What is that? When that is only now, see, this is the relation between the effective diffusivities, okay, and this is the relationship which is dependent on which convenient class it is in, diffusion A through stagnant B, or it is equimolar counter diffusion. Even if it is equimolar counter diffusion, you would be replacing DAB by this DAB effective. Yeah. So, that is later convenience, it's only those classes, diffusion of A through B, or it is equimolar counter diffusion. That is after this has been established. No, this is something else. When you are solving those problems, I had given you those charts, EA, EB, EC versus that dimensionless time d theta by a square. So, if I give you a plate which is porous, or a cylinder which is porous, or sphere which is porous, I could use the same equations by replacing DAB by DAB effective. This is replacement, not tending. Okay. So, this is my shorthand, but it's not, it has nothing to do with that NB equal to 0 making DAB effective as DAB. It is only that you could use those equations for EA or those charts replacing DAB by DAB effective. So, same thing which was for a continuous medium, normal medium for different geometries, same would be applicable, just we replace the quantities corresponding to the porous solid. Tau is a tortuosity, I should explain this a bit. Tortuosity is because if you take a cylindrical disc, the thickness of this disc, suppose it's 1 centimeter, okay. 1 centimeter will be the length of pore if the pore were straight, but actually pores are not straight. If they are interconnected pores, then pores will be longer than 1 centimeter. They will go in their own way depending on how you made that, right. So, when it comes to diffusion of molecules through these tortuous passages, it will get harder for them because greater resistance, now it is longer path, right. So, this is introduced as a factor which is empirical factor whose value is greater than 1, okay. There is one particular porous solid called Vicor glass, for which it comes out to be exactly 2. Otherwise, depending on what porous solid you have, you will have to adjust its value for certain experiments, and then once you are sure that you have characterized tortuosity, you could use it for other conditions, for other solutes and so on. Okay. So, it is only an empirical factor. Epsilon is measurable in the sense, suppose I give you say a porous pellet, catalyst pellet, and I want to determine the porosity. One way is, of course, you go to the high end instrument, a BET apparatus, and get the entire porosity map. What are the pore volumes, what are the sizes, how they are distributed, entire thing. The simplest other way would be that you take that catalyst pellet and dip it in water. Take initial dry weight, and then after it has imbibed all the water, initial weight you take, and then finally after it has imbibed all the water, you remove the water sticking to the external surface and then take weight again. It will give you the weight of the water which has gone inside. Now, this is a pretty bad idea because water may not be weighting the solid, and in general what we do is, there is a standard instrument, a very expensive instrument by usual standards, something like about 40 to 50 lakhs it will cost. It's called mercury porosimeter. So, what you do is you take this porous solid, dip it in mercury in a chamber of the instrument, and then pressurize under high pressure, you force mercury inside the solid, and then take the weight before and after, and you know how much mercury has been accommodated inside under very high pressure. So, practically except the isolated pores, all the pores will be occupied, and you get a estimate of porosity. Those are two ways. Tortuosity, you have to play with the actual diffusional experiments or reaction experiments. If the ordinary diffusion that we have been talking about is operative, then we expect our DAB or DAB effective to go as roughly T to the power 3 by 2 by PT. That is how the gas phase diffusivities are correlated, right? And you could use this equation. That kind of phenomenon is permissible if this dimensionless ratio of the pore diameter to the mean free path is in excess of 20. If the pore diameter is in excess of 20 times the mean free path, then under those pressure conditions for that porous solid, the molecule collisions will still be predominating. Okay. But if you change it, say within the same pores you keep diminishing pressure, and this ratio d by lambda becomes say 1 by 5, 0.2 or lesser than that, which means the mean free path is 5 times more larger than the pore diameter, in which case the molecules will collide more often with the walls rather than with other molecules. There the diffusion becomes totally different, and that's what Knudsen diffusion is. It would become, under those cases, for this say pore diameter is d, length is l, the Knudsen diffusion coefficient comes out to be equal to this d UA bar by 3, where UA bar is the average molecular velocity, which is root of 8 RT by pi MA. So that diffusivity according to this will go as temperature to the power half rather than upwards of 3 by 2. This is very different, and it is as expected independent of pressure, practically independent of pressure, because imagine that we have come to Knudsen diffusion regime by lowering of pressure or by lengthening of the mean free path. You already will be going into that asymptotic region where pressure is so low that any further reduction in pressure is not going to make a huge difference. Molecules will collide with walls and that will predominate, right? So you could see now that there is a distinct difference in the dependence of diffusivity on temperature and pressure. Knudsen diffusivity is given by this d UA bar by 3. This is nothing but your Ca1 minus Ca2 by L. That is the gradient of concentration times the diffusivity, that is your flux. Okay. So dKa is d by 3 root of 8 RT by pi MA. Before you can solve any problem on porous solids, let us see what should be our first step. The first step is to decide whether d by lambda is less than 0.2 or it is greater than 20, which means now you are coming more in line with the coursework. You first study determination of mean free path, then you come to the Knudsen diffusion. So the first step will be obviously to calculate the mean free path, which is given by this 3.2 mu by pt root of RT by 2 pi m. Pore diameter will be known to you. You decide where we are, whether it's ordinary diffusion or Knudsen diffusion. And if you happen to be in this transition range between 0.2 and 20 for d by lambda, then you need another expression, which is a combination of the Knudsen diffusivity as well as the ordinary diffusivity, both in effective sense. Okay. Maybe we can stop here. I will briefly talk about this next time and then move on to next.